All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. It's always exciting starting off each one of these events since schools have closed because we get to see so many groups who are joining live via YouTube as well as live on camera with us. So it's awesome to see that the learning is continuing to happen. Even though it's in a little bit of a different way, we can still broadcast live into the homes of families, of educators, students, parents. So it's really great to be able to keep bringing the scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists live into your living rooms, your bedrooms, your kitchens, wherever you're hanging out with us right now. Pretty awesome. All right. Well, we've been doing a fun series of events with Lindblad Expeditions. We've been teaming up to host some of their naturalists from around the world. So these naturalists are super experienced. They lead all kinds of amazing trips around the world and have an amazing wealth of knowledge about the areas that they do get to explore. So we've been to Svalbard. We're heading to the Antarctica soon. We've been to Alaska. So it's very exciting to be able to do these live events with Lindblad. So we're really excited today to have Alyssa Adler joining us. So she's going to take us on a little bit of a virtual field trip to check out the natural wonders of Belize. So originally from Oregon, Alyssa has always had a strong relationship with nature and the outdoors. So she found her passion for the ocean while she was studying at Oregon State University, and she's worked globally as an underwater videographer and ocean educator. So whether it's warm coral reefs in the Seychelles, whether it's kelp forests in Southern Argentina, she loves checking out anything beneath those waves. Additionally, she has a love for diving at the poles. So cold water diving, spending time in Antarctica and the high Arctic. But as you're going to learn today, she does take a little bit of time to explore some of those warmer regions. So Alyssa, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We're excited to get to know you a little bit better. And then we've got a great group who's going to fire some questions your way.
All right, that sounds fantastic. So it's nice to meet everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Super exciting to see a few of you in your own homes up there in the top bar. So I will, like Joe said, be showing you a little bit about Belize. I'll try to speak for about 15 minutes or so. I might go over a little bit, but I will share my screen with you now. Let's see if we can do that. All right. Do you have it? Fantastic. Okay, so today what we're gonna do is go through just a little bit of the basics of Belize, chat about that first, and then I'll talk about, for a second, coral reefs, what they are, how they work. But really what we're gonna focus on today is a few of the critters that you might not think about on the reef, and those are oftentimes my favorite animals. So when you think about a coral reef, you might only think about fish or maybe sharks or sea turtles, but there's also a lot of other animals down there. So we'll chat a little bit about those critters that you think most define a reef. And I'll also introduce you to some that you might not even know exist. And then we will go over one issue that Belize is dealing with right now on its reefs and the greater Caribbean as well. Does that sound good? Okay, so here we go. A little bit of information about the coral reefs of Belize and the marine critters of the not so deep. All right, so, just so I know too, can you see my cursor? Yeah, okay, that's helpful. All right, so just to give you a little bit of Belize basics, where we are on the map, I find Belize isn't actually an incredibly well-known place for many folks. So here we have a map of North America. And we can see down into Mexico. If you go south of Mexico, you'll find Belize. It's this red country right here. And this coastline here is actually about 240 miles long. So it has an incredible coastline. This is a zoomed in rectangle here. You can see Belize in the center. And the next image I show you on our following page will be pretty much this area. Okay, so that's what you're looking at, a chunk of Mexico, Belize, a bit of Honduras, and Guatemala's small Atlantic coast. And there that is. So this is called the Mesoamerican Reef. It is the second largest barrier reef worldwide. And just by a show of hands for you folks I can see, who thinks they know what the first largest barrier reef might be? Yeah, that's the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. I'm sure you all knew that. I wish I could pull you, but It's the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. So here, the Mesoamerican Reef down the coast of Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico is about 600 miles long, and the Great Barrier Reef is about 1,400 miles long. So it is significantly longer, but that doesn't put us in the Americas at any disadvantage. It's great to have the second largest barrier reef here in Belize, and it's an incredible ecosystem. This is just a little shot of the underwater world and what a coral reef might look like. I want you to know that it's not one extensive piece, right? So it's several boulders of coral or patches of coral that make up this reef ecosystem. It's not as if there's one piece of coral that meanders for 600 straight miles. And when you get an up close look at that coral, it might be something like this. So this is a photo I took in Belize. Do you know if coral is an animal or a plant? Looks a little bit like a plant, doesn't it? But in reality, it's both. It's a bit of a trick question. I'm sorry to throw that at you so early in our conversation. So each of these, they're called polyps, are individuals. These are animals living together in one colony. So there are many, many individuals that can make up a colony. It can be hundreds, it can be thousands. And to make up an extensive reef, like the Mesoamerican reef, for example, it would be millions of polyps joining together in boulders and patches to create the reef ecosystem. This is the animal part that you're looking at here. And looking at this small figure on the right, looks like I cut off this. This should be a Z. It's called zooxanthellae. And between zooxanthellae and coral, we find a great example of a symbiotic relationship. So a symbiotic relationship is one where two organisms are working together to live. So here, algae is working with the coral animal to survive. And within this skin membrane of one polyp, right? So this is a blown up example of one of these. Within this skin membrane, you have thousands and thousands, millions of tiny zooxanthellae cells, and they photosynthesize. So that means they use the sunlight to create their food. And that's why you find coral reefs shallow. These are hard corals that need sunlight because of their symbiotic zooxanthellae. And so they live in the shallows where they have good light availability versus deep water coral, which doesn't have that. These tentacles you see here aren't in the image, and that might be confusing, right? Why don't you see them? That's because this is daytime when I took this photo, and during the daytime, the zooxanthellae is feeding. But at night, when the sun isn't available, these polyps put out their tentacles and they're able to feed on any little critters that might be passing by in the water column. So the water column is just generally the ocean, right? And the ocean has currents and tides and stuff moves. So as the ocean moves by, these tentacles can grab things like plankton out of the water column and feed the coral animal at night, whereas the zooxanthellae is feeding the coral animal during the day. Does that make sense? All right. Now we're going to move on to a few videos and look at how the coral reef ecosystem interacts and how incredibly dynamic it is. So I'll explain these videos a little bit first. Oh, I'm sorry, Joe, can I go back for 1 second and unshare my screen and then reshare it so I can optimize video?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I completely forgot to do that.
No, don't worry about that at all.
All right. Let's see. How do I do that?
Is the video that you want to play, is it separate or is it built into the presentation?
It's built in, but I think it's going to be a little choppy.
Yeah, let's give it a play. I bet it'll be fine.
Okay, we'll try this one. And if it's not for the subsequent ones, if I just unshare and then click a thing to optimize video, it should be better.
Okay.
All right, so let's try this. You will see several fish. These are juvenile grunt, are the species of fish, and they are in staghorn coral. So if you look at this coral, this species is staghorn coral, and it's really healthy. You can see these little white tips at the top. This is an example of coral that's growing and hasn't picked up zooxanthellae yet. So zooxanthellae is going to give the coral its color, and that's all this brownish, orangish coral here has already uptaked its zooxanthellae. These little white bits have not yet. All right, so all of these grunts here are schooling over this staghorn coral thicket, is what it's called. So you have a school of fish over a thicket of staghorn coral. And if a predator were to come by, all they need to do is sort of hunched down into that coral and they're protected. So it's a really good way to see how that habitat is assisting those animals, right? All right, Joe, how did that play?
Yeah, that was great, Alyssa. It played well.
Okay, everyone else out there in your homes, would it seem okay? Okay. Oops, let's go to the next one. Another example here. So this is a juvenile angelfish that you just saw come out from under that coral boulder. These are all videos from Belize, by the way, in the last month or so that I was down there. I'm not there anymore. And a sea star out here as well in front. So this is a juvenile fish, just like the grunts we saw before. It's a little bit more susceptible to predation, right? It's a little bit more vulnerable. It's not a big, sturdy adult yet. It's still young. And so it needs some protection, and it's spending time in that coral boulder to offer protection. Another animal, you might be able to see it already, but it's known as a cryptic species, meaning that it has really good camouflage and it doesn't want to be seen very often. I'll give you a hint. This is the eye. All right, we're looking at an octopus here, and we can see that it also is under a coral boulder hiding out. This animal is always a treat for me to see. And if you look around here, you can see its skin color change as it gets braver and braver and starts to move itself out from under that protected coral and out into the real world to go hunting. When we look at these, we now know this is a close-up shot of coral, isn't it? And you can see here, these are all individual polyps. So this is a species of coral that has smaller polyps than the first species I showed you. But look at all of those polyps with zooxanthellae. Some of them don't have as much zooxanthellae as others, and that's potentially a sign of stress on this boulder of coral. But what we're looking at here is this animal. This is actually a worm, and it's called a Christmas tree worm. Maybe those of you who have been snorkeling or diving in warm areas have seen these animals. Really incredible. We're going to see it bloom into a beautiful flower today. But really what it's doing it's not trying to be beautiful. It's just putting its mouth parts out into the water to catch some of that plankton and animals out of the water column that come by, just like I said coral will with its tentacles. So it puts its mouth parts into the water, and then when it gets scared, if something comes by and gives a little bit of current at it, it'll shoot back down into that house that it built for itself. This is a sea slug. It's called a lettuce sea slug, and something that's incredible about these animals is that they also have a very similar symbiotic relationship as the coral. So they are able to hold zooxanthellae in their back frills here, which allows them to produce an incredible amount of food for themselves as well. You can look, this is the front of the animal. These are two tiny little eyes in the front here, those black dots. So primitive eye spots that will allow this animal to see where it's going a little bit. And this critter is only about 1 inch long. So really, really small. This is a very tight up close macro shot. That Christmas tree worm I just showed you a minute ago is similarly a tiny, tiny critter. And a lot of these animals are, which is why people don't know about them as much as they would fish or sharks or other critters. This is a cleaner shrimp, and it's associated with this anemone. You can see the anemone's tentacles coming in and out of the shot with the current. This shrimp uses its ability to clean other animals. So if a fish comes by and says, hey, I have a parasite on my back, it might sort of sidle up to this cleaner shrimp. Cleaner shrimp will take the opportunity for a meal, and it'll hop onto the fish, clean that parasite off the fish, ingest it, and let the fish go on its way. So it's almost like, I mean, it's a cleaning station for many animals. We'll come by and spend time with the cleaner shrimp. This is one of my favorite animals I filmed on this reef in the last month. This is called a mantis shrimp. And I'm not sure if anybody's heard of mantis shrimp out there. There are many, many species. They have incredible vision, vision that we don't fully understand yet even. And I saw this animal in the super shallows. This is about 6 inches deep of water. And just about as I was gonna get onto the beach, it was cleaning out its den. And so I took a minute to film him cleaning out his den there before I got out of the water. But I just loved how busy he was, you know, making sure his home was ready for spring. And I believe this is the last critter video I have for you. This is a queen conch. This is an algae eater. It's not necessarily associated with the coral reef itself, but there's very important seagrass beds that intermix with the coral reef ecosystem in Belize. So you'll have seagrass beds right by coral reef, and this animal is really important in the seagrass beds. You might have seen this critter's shell. Conch shells are really popular and well known. They get very large. But I wanted to give you a quick look at what this animal looks like in its life and not just as a shell. This is how it moves along, and this video is sped up about 400%. So it's a very slow moving animal. I didn't want to make you watch it for minutes. You can see those eyes kind of carefully poking out of the shell, and its feeding tube out there looking for algae bits along the substrate or sea floor as it moves by. Okay, so this is the point where we're switching over. I think I'm already a little bit late on how long I was supposed to speak for, so I'll try to go quick here. I wanted to talk about an issue on Belizean reefs, and that's an invasion that not only Belize, but a large part of the Caribbean has been dealing with in the past 20 years or so. Does this fish look familiar to anyone? It's a beautifully ornate animal. Yeah, it's called a lionfish. And for those of you who have been in the Caribbean snorkeling or scuba diving, or even just for vacation, maybe with your parents, you might have seen this fish and not known what it is or the implications it might have for the ecosystem, right? But what is really interesting about you seeing that animal in this area of the world is that it's actually not from here. So this is what we call an invasive species, and it originally comes from this area. Looking at this chart, it can look like a lot of information to digest, and don't worry too much about that. What I want you to take away from this is that this lionfish is originally from these areas in green and blue. That's its native region, okay? So in Indonesia and the Indian Ocean, the red, it's where this is the zone it has taken over. And down here where it's sort of checkered, along the east coast of South America, this is its predicted range over the next couple decades, okay? So it's in here in quite an incredible density, as you'll see soon here, and down into here is where we think it might go in the next while. This figure is going to show you the expansion of lionfish distribution in the Northwest Atlantic and Caribbean. So look at this one little red dot here off the coast of Florida. This is where a lionfish was first spotted in the Atlantic, and that was in 1985. And for a while, nothing much really happened. For about 15 years or so, actually, nothing much really happened. The idea here is that someone likely had a lionfish in aquaria. It's an incredibly strong predator. And so at some point, that lionfish got hungry, probably ate other fish in this aquarium system, and this owner said, nope, I don't want this fish anymore, dropped it off in the ocean. And over the course of the next 15 years, that happened 7 or 11 more times. So genetically, we can trace this invasion back to 8 or 12 parent individuals. Of those 8 or 12 parent individuals, look at how this has expanded. So it's a great lesson in why we need to be careful about our actions and not introduce animals that maybe shouldn't be in places to those regions. 2008 is when we first see an animal pop up in Belize. And at that point, the invasion is everywhere, all over the Caribbean. And these are only sightings. So it's very likely that these animals are in other areas that haven't been marked on this graph. These are places where folks have seen a lionfish firsthand, contacted USGS and said, all right, it's been sighted here. We'll put a dot on our map in the year 2012 or whatever it was, right? This goes straight through to 2020. And at this point, they're everywhere that somebody might spot them on a dive site or a snorkel site. Oh, sorry, it's restarting. All right, so this photo is from Erin Spencer. She was a National Geographic Young Explorer that did a project on lionfish. So I'm sorry I stole a photo from you, Erin Spencer. But I wanted to use this shot to show you that one big problem with lionfish here is their spines. They are covered in spines. And you might've seen that in the first photo I showed you. They're beautiful fish, but they're very dangerous looking. And that's for a good reason. They are venomous. Importantly, the difference between venomous and poisonous. is huge. So an animal that is poisonous, if you eat that animal's flesh, you're going to have a bad time. An animal that's venomous will deliver its toxin through something like spines or fangs. You don't need to eat a venomous animal to suffer the consequences. You need to eat a poisonous animal to suffer the consequences, all right? This is an article a scientist I worked for in my undergraduate career published, and he found that the Indo-Pacific lionfish, this animal we're talking about, can reduce recruitment of reef fish by 79% over a 5-week duration. So what that means is that this fish is able to stop other fish from succeeding in a local reef by 79%. So say that reef starts over 5 weeks. So say that reef starts with 100 small coral reef fish, and you introduce one lionfish, it will eat 79 of those 100 fish over the course of a 5-week period and reduce their ability to recongregate in the area. That's an incredible amount. In this picture here, this is a dissection done of a lionfish, and there are 10 small fish found in this stomach, or I believe it was actually 20 small fish found in this stomach. And this is possible even over the course of a half an hour. If a hungry lionfish wants to, it can take an incredible amount of small fish off the reef. And these small fish are important because they're herbivores. So they are eating things like algae that might be competing with the coral for growing space. Since coral is a slow growing animal, it can take hundreds of years to create a boulder that's a meter wide, say. It competes with other slow growing organisms like algae. And so coral reef fish come in and manage that balance. If you have a predator come in that eats the coral reef fish that manage the balance, you are then left with an unbalanced ecosystem. So the question is, what are local communities doing to combat this problem? And the answer is that a lot of them are creating things like lionfish derbies. So they will say, oh, come, go spearfishing, get some lionfish. We'll see who has the biggest fish. That person gets a prize. And it's a great idea. Belize did something like this as well, where they actually had a government-funded stipend for a project similar to this. And they offered $25 for one lionfish, which in Belize is about 2 days' salary if you're getting paid minimum wage. So that's really good, right? Everyone took to the sea, went spearfishing, got lionfish, and funding that they expected to last for years was gone in about a month. And that really opened their eyes to the problem that they're having here while they're in Belize and also throughout the rest of the Caribbean. There has been a lot of recreational lionfish fishing that's gone on. These are, well protected bags so that those spines can't stick you. You can go spearfishing with a spear gun, put the fish into this bag, and it's going to keep you safe, and you will have helped take these animals off the reef a little bit. This is a dive I went on in Belize. There are several lionfish here that have been caught. This gentleman actually found about 20 lionfish to catch in a 45-minute period. That's quite a big number. The real question is, though, what can we do to help, right? What are we going to do to make sure this is less of a problem? And the answer is eat them. We're going to eat them. It's okay. They're not poisonous. They're venomous. They're really tasty. They're a delicious white fish. This gentleman here said he's been stung 7 times by doing things like this, filleting. So don't fillet if you're not sure what you're doing there. But they eat lionfish all the time down there. We had some fresh cooked lionfish right after that video, and it was absolutely delicious. I wanted to bring this to you just as a bit of awareness, right? So next time you go to the Caribbean or the Atlantic or down in that area, if you see lionfish on a menu, I encourage you to give it a try. It's often served as ceviche, but it's also served as filet and in a burger style, something like that. So if you see it on the menu, just know that if you're trying to eat fish sustainably, this is not only a sustainable option, it's one that really, really helps the reef, rather than taking a native predator from the reef ecosystem that you might eat other than a lionfish. With that, I wanted to leave you with one last little video of a critter that you might recognize, just because most of these were critters you don't recognize. So here you go. This is a little dog named Shadow that was on a reef in Belize I found on a small island. I wanted to end with a shot of him being a good boy and getting a stick out of the water. And with that, I believe I will stop sharing my screen, ask you guys if you have any questions, and Joe, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right, excellent. Well, Alyssa, thank you so much for sharing those videos with us and that story as well. It's important to know about conservation issues happening around the world. And you've really succeeded in making me miss warm water diving. So it's still pretty cold up here in Canada, so it's going to be a little bit before we can hit the water. All right. We've got a great group joining us. We've got groups joining us live on YouTube. I can see some of them chatting there. So start sending in your questions and we'll work some of those in. And then we have a great group joining us on camera from a few different places. And in fact, we have Zoe in Indiana who's already put up her virtual hand. So let's let Zoe kick things off for us.
So I was wondering how many types of coral there are and how many symbiotic creatures there are that interact with the coral.
That is a really good question, Zoe. I don't have a number answer for you, but there are hundreds of species of coral in the world, and they often change regionally. So there might be a species of coral in the Caribbean, say, that looks very similar to a species of coral you might see in Indonesia, and those could be sort of cousin species. You see that a lot worldwide, and there are so many symbiotic relationships, but just some really particularly cool ones, like that zooxanthellae relationship with the coral. That cleaner shrimp I showed you is another example of a symbiotic relationship. So that cleaner shrimp is spending its time among a stinging anemone, but it's able to protect itself with that anemone without getting stung because it is symbiotically related to that critter. Good question.
Thank you.
Very cool. And I've even heard of cases where the cleaner shrimp or cleaner fish will come right onto divers and pick things out of their teeth and clean them up. So that's pretty cool.
That is.
All right, Carter and Annabella, they're hanging out with us in New Jersey. Let me turn their microphone on. Hey, New Jersey, how you guys doing?
Hi. We were wondering what animals that you want to see that you haven't seen before.
Ooh, what animals do I want to see that I haven't seen before? That's a really good question. I think I've never seen a whale underwater. I would love to see a whale underwater. I think that would be really, really special, but it hasn't happened yet. I've been incredibly lucky to see a lot of very special critters underwater, but that's one that I haven't seen that I would really, really like to. I'll let you know if I do.
All right, very cool. Good choice. I would like that too. I've heard them singing underwater, the humpback whales while diving, but they were just not close enough to see.
Yep. Exactly.
All right. Mrs. Pizziali's class is joining us in Vancouver, Canada. And they sent in a question on YouTube. And they're wondering, is diving the only way to observe all this amazing life?
Diving is not the only way. I mean, there are great aquariums around the world where you could see a lot of these critters up close and personal, especially since some of them are so tiny. There are some great exhibits. I'm sure Vancouver has a great aquarium exhibit, actually, of many of these animals I've shown you. And also snorkeling is a great way to get out there and see these animals. So actually, the majority of the footage I showed you, I took while I was snorkeling. Very little of it was diving with a tank. So most of it, I took one breath and went down to the bottom, got some footage and came back up. But a lot of those critters are very shallow as well. So the mantis shrimp I showed you, that was in only 6 inches of water. And I was actually breathing through my snorkel the whole time I shot that video. So some of them, you don't need to be a diver at all. You could be on land and dry looking through an aquarium, or you could be snorkeling and just breathing the whole time you're observing them.
All right. So we have Ms. Huxley joining us. Her class is in Brampton, Ontario, and we're going to say hi to her in just a moment. But one of her students has already sent in a question via the chat. So I'm going to pop that question up now. And Nimar is joining us, and he is wondering, what are some other roles that coral plays in the ecosystem, in an underwater ecosystem?
Oh, what are other roles that coral plays in an underwater ecosystem? Well, they do quite a great deal. I mean, their most important role, in my opinion, is to create habitat for animals. So as the basis of this habitat, they create a foundation for all other critters to come in and build this ecosystem, right? So the coral reef is the foundation. And because of that, you have everything from these small animals I've shown you up to big predators like sharks. And these sharks go across a huge open called pelagic zone, like major ocean crossings, to get to a coral reef where they can do things like feed or maybe breed or maybe pup. So they act as nursery grounds. They act as general ecosystems for adult critters. And they act as feeding grounds for predators. So very, very important foundations for animals worldwide, really.
All right. Good question. So we're going to go now. We're going to turn on the mic for Mrs. Kranicki, and she is representing her school. Her students are on YouTube in Colchester, Connecticut. Let me get their microphone turned on. There we go. How are you doing today?
Hi, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this for us today, Alyssa. I have several questions, but the most important one I'm seeing is one that came from Lucas. And Lucas wants to know, what's the best experience you have had as a naturalist?
Oh my gosh, Lucas, that's such a hard question. It's really, really hard to narrow it down to one best experience. But I can tell you my first favorite experience that I had scuba diving in warm water, since that seems like an applicable experience for this talk. So I did a study abroad program in the Caribbean when I was in my undergraduate career, and I went on my first night dive on a shipwreck. And to do that, we swam above this shipwreck that sat in 100 feet of water, and we were gonna drop down scuba diving straight onto the shipwreck, right? But we all turned off our lights. Our dive master said, turn off your lights. And as we go to drop down onto this shipwreck, kind of flail your arms a little bit and let's see what happens. And we did that. And there are some plankton in the water that are bioluminescent, meaning they create blue light at certain times of the year, certain moon cycles, they're triggered to do this. And this happened to be one of those times. So we did that. And you could see every diver was surrounded in these beautiful blue glowing lights. It was the most magical, beautiful water experience I'd ever had. And part of that is that when you're scuba diving and underwater, you're not speaking to each other. And so the experience is all sort of your own, you know? So you can think, wow, and you can even say, wow, but no one else can really hear you. It was a beautiful first favorite experience I think I had.
All right, very cool. I did something very similar in Cozumel, and yeah, when you're under there in the dark and you start waving your arms, it's pretty darn cool. And then even better, we turned our flashlight on. We got to watch an octopus hunting. So it was pretty good. All right, let's see. Who should we visit next? We're going to visit a family this time. They are joining us in Brooklyn, Ontario. The Buckley family. Let me get that microphone turned on. There it is. All right, we got you this time. Hey, Ontario.
We were just in awe of your videography, and we were wondering, like, what does it take to do something like that? Like, did you go down with a team? What type of equipment? And how long did you wait for that conch clip?
Oh, thank you so much. So the camera I used for the majority of that footage was a Sony RX100. It's actually a great little camera. Looks a lot like what you would think of a point and shoot camera to look like. And like I said, most of that footage was actually done snorkeling or freediving. So I spent most of my time scoping out the shot and angle I wanted. And then I would dive down and set up a shot, make sure everything was the right focus, right settings. And then I would leave the scene alone so that the animals would act naturally without me being too close to them. So the queen conch shot, it took me a few tries, especially because they can be kind of shy animals. I mean, they have this beautiful protective shell, right? So it's really easy for that critter to just go back into its shell and not be anywhere close to me if I look like a predator. But to just leave the camera there and take off from the scene is often a good way to let animals act in their own environment as they would if I weren't there. So I'd say maybe 45 minutes or so I spent getting the queen conch shot before it ended up like I wanted it to. Thank you.
Got to get that mic on. All right, great question. Let's take one from YouTube this time. Let's see. All right, so here is one. about ecotourism in Belize. This is Carla. Looks like she's joining us from Canada, and wondering about the ecotourism in Belize. Have you seen any areas or any resorts that look like they're doing a really good job?
Oh, I mean, there are tons of companies that do great work in Belize. Also, Belize as a government has done quite a bit to ensure protection of their coral reef ecosystems. So they do try to take really good care of those reefs. They've created marine protected areas. I believe there are 7 marine protected areas now in Belize, and that really ramps up the overall coral reef health. So on a general scale, it has improved over the past decade, and that's really easy to see. There are also pretty strong measures that Belize takes to make sure that tourists aren't being destructive generally to reefs. So if you are snorkeling or diving in Belize, you do need a guide. Even to snorkel, you must have a Belizean guide with you, and that's a great measure that they take. I worked with a team called Splash, and they were fantastic. So yeah, Belize does a really good job of making sure their reefs stay healthy and safe, better and better every year.
All right, let's visit Miss Huxley. Let's turn her microphone on. Miss Huxley, welcome back. And do you have a question for us?
I think I have a question from Dia, who's asking, how many eggs does a shrimp produce?
Ooh, how many eggs does a shrimp produce? I'm not sure of the actual number on that. I'm sorry, Dia, great question. I would say hundreds, but I'm not sure the actual number. So yeah, hundreds in one clutch would be my assumption. And most of those eggs actually won't make it to maturity. So like many animals who reproduce in the ocean, they will create many, many more eggs than will actually reach maturity or adulthood. Many of those eggs will end up in the water column being taken here or there with the current. And a lot of those will be eaten by other members of the community. So any animal that eats plankton out of the water, just like we saw the coral mite, the anemone mite, anything with tentacles is going to do that. The Christmas tree worm, for example. So a lot of those eggs will be eaten up by other critters, and that just supports the entire ecosystem.
All right, good question. And that's a little homeschool work. So if students want to dive a little deeper on Google, they can try and track down how many eggs a shrimp does lay. Okay, give me a wave. Anyone on our camera crew who might want to ask another question, I'll know to come back and visit your group. I have a feeling that we'll have a couple more. Let's go back to our educator in Connecticut.
Hi again. I have a question from Andrew, and Andrew wanted to know if there are other things that we could do to help control the lionfish population.
Are there other things we can do to help control the lionfish population? It's a bit of a tricky invasion because they are great reproducers. They reproduce all year long, and warm water just helps with that. They live very deep, so they can live down to 600 feet deep. And all of that is just, it compounds the issue a bit. I think the most we can do is be aware of the issue, eat lionfish whenever you see it as an option, support not introducing other invasive species into the environment. So spreading the knowledge that I just imparted onto you, tell other people about it, and use lionfish as an example for why we need to be more careful with our natural ecosystems. Yeah, that's what I would say. Keep eating lionfish and just be very, very careful of your actions and the impact they might have on the world.
All right, so we have hosted that Erin Spencer character a few times in the past, and she said that lionfish is delicious. So
it is.
I agree. Check it out. Cool. Zoe, Indiana, let me turn your microphone back on.
So I was wondering what happens when you get stung by the lionfish, when the lionfish venom gets injected into you.
Yeah, what happens when you get stung by a lionfish? I haven't personally been stung, so I'll tell you anecdotally what happens, but it is meant to be very painful. It's not fatal in most cases, but it can send people into anaphylactic shock. The gentleman who was filleting those fish in that video told me, like I said, he's been stung 7 times. And he said each time it's very, very painful. It's a neurotoxin, so it affects your nerves. And yeah, it's just painful. It can last for hours and hours. It will subside at some point, but in the meantime, it's just an uncomfortable feeling. And that is the same thing that would happen to a predator if they go to eat a lionfish as well, right? which is why the lionfish has been such a successful invader. It does have a natural predator in the Indo-Pacific, and that's called a cornet fish. But over here in the Caribbean and Atlantic, it doesn't have a natural predator. And all of our reef predators are a little bit hesitant to take a bite out of a lionfish. But interestingly, some spear fishermen in Belize have noticed that nurse sharks will now take a speared lionfish off their spear and eat them, which they didn't used to do. So some predators are somewhat beginning to learn that they can eat lionfish once they've been killed, but they won't take the opportunity to hunt for them themselves.
All right. So if you do have another question on camera, give me a wave, but I do have another one from YouTube that I'm going to work in while I wait to see. And so this one is about when you knew. So this is from Charlie. When did you know that you wanted to do what you're doing now? How old were you?
Not as young as you might think. So I thought I wanted to be an attorney for my whole life. My parents were both attorneys, and I wanted to follow in their footsteps and be a lawyer when I grew up. And when I got to college, I remember sitting down in my dorm room desk and thinking, what do I want my life to look like when I'm an adult? And I decided I wanted to be outside and be able to travel for work and have adventure as a main part of my life. So I figured marine biology might do that for me. And even though I'd been scared of water for most of my life, I started scuba diving. And once I started scuba diving, I just knew. So my first scuba diving class when I was 19, I absolutely fell in love with it. I got certified to scuba dive on the Oregon coast, which is a much different place than the Caribbean. But even still, it was gorgeous. And just the thrill of adventure, I loved it. And I still do. Every time I go diving, I'm still just ecstatic to be there.
All right, very cool. So we've got about 2 minutes left. Does anybody else joining us live have a camera question? Okay, Ontario. We're ready. And it looks like New Jersey too, maybe.
Oh, for us?
You gotcha. Yeah.
Well, I like what you just said, that you thought about what you wanted your life to look like, because I have 3 teenagers here as well, and they're thinking about their future. But we wanted to follow your next exploration. What are you currently working on? Are you doing some research? I read something that you were currently exploring the polar waters.
So I spend a lot of my time in polar water and temperate ecosystems. So like Southern Patagonia, Alaska, and then the polar water being Antarctica and the Arctic. I was supposed to be going to Svalbard in late May, but I won't be doing that anymore. Just, coronavirus has changed scheduling quite a bit for most folks who travel for work. There's possibility that I'll be going to Iceland in late July and then Greenland in August. So that is my next adventure. And I would love for you guys to follow along if you're interested.
All right, very cool. So we did an awesome event with Alyssa and another naturalist, Doug, when they were in Antarctica, and they used one of our satellite units, only this big, to broadcast with penguins in Antarctica. That was pretty awesome. So I could share the link to that as well, so people can check that out if you want to see Alyssa in the field. It's pretty cool.
Thanks, Joe. That was really fun.
And New Jersey, Carter and Annabella, it looked like you might have one more question for us.
Have you seen a sea turtle?
I have been so lucky to see a lot of sea turtles. And even luckier, I worked in North Carolina as a scientific diver, which means I got to do research on shipwrecks for work, which is really, really special. And when I did that, I was able to release baby sea turtles back into the wild as part of my job. So I've been able to see sea turtles in the wild, interact with them, and release little babies that had been rehabilitated back into their natural environment.
Pretty awesome. So we had one more question come in via YouTube that I want to work in. And this is again on that invasive species. Have you encountered or heard of any other invasive species in the reef around Belize?
In the reef around Belize, lionfish are the standout for me. That's not to say that there aren't others. I'm sure there are. But for me, the one that I focused on most when I was down there earlier this spring, lionfish absolutely stood out as the invasive species to take note of.
All right.
But for me, the one that I focused on.
All right. So I've just dropped that link into the chat. So I just dropped a YouTube link if you do want to check out Alyssa in Antarctica. It's pretty darn cool. I want to do a huge shout out to all the groups who joined us live on YouTube. Thanks for the great questions. I want to give a shout out to the educators, the families, and the students who joined us live in the call today. Thanks for learning with us today. And Alyssa, a huge thank you to you. Thanks for taking some time at home to take us to Belize and show us how awesome it is, but how fragile it can be too.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was really fun. It's great to see all of you. I appreciate you joining. All
right. Well, I'm going to turn the microphones on because I can see some people clapping, but I want to hear some nice goodbyes. So let's get those microphones on. A big goodbye and thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Bye. All right.
Thank you.
Good job, everyone. Well, thanks so much for hanging out today. We have so many more events coming up over the next few weeks. So check them out on our website, exploringbytheseat.com, and we'll see you all again. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe.